Welcome to ArtBeat, Canada's Art Pulse. I'm your host, Katie. In this episode, we speak with Rah Eleh, an artist who navigates the complex interplay between digital, performance, and video mediums to explore identity, futurism, and cultural narratives. Rah's work engages with themes of queer culture, Iranian heritage, and rave culture's dynamics. We'll explore Rah's impactful contributions to the Canadian art scene and her pioneering projects that push the limits of artistic expression. Join us as we uncover the stories behind Rah Eleh's art and her vision for the future. Rah, hi.
Hi, Katie. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Rah, I would like to start off if you could tell us where you are right now.
I'm actually in New York right now. I'm doing an artist residency with Onyx Studio in collaboration with the Canadian Juno Awards and the University of Winnipeg. So I was invited here by my curator, Julie Nagam, to come and do a VR piece that we're going to be showcasing at the Junos this year. And I'm going to be collaborating with a musician on the project. I'm still not sure who my musician is, but my list is ambitious. That's why it's taking a little bit longer. But I have some key Canadian artists in mind that I think will be really great for this project. So I'm kind of we're waiting to see what their agents say. But overall, it's been a pretty good residency. You know, it's great to be in the city. It's actually kind of quiet in New York in January, more than, the summer vibe. So there are no lineups for the good restaurants. So
well, that's amazing.
Because I came here during Christmas and everything was a lineup. And then I went back in January and I was like, you can just walk in. So it was awesome. Yeah.
Can you share more about what you're doing with your VR residency?
Yeah, so we're doing motion capture, so collecting data from dancers, and the dancers are from a dance company here. They're the fabulous whack dancers, and whacking is a style of dance. It's actually appeared in my practice a few times because I was part of the community pre-COVID. I was always really into urban dance, but especially whacking. I think it was the one dance that I really stuck to for a short time, and always as a hobbyist, never as like a professional dancer. But I always loved dance. So I like to work with dancers. And for this project, we're working with 3 whackers from the company of Princess Lockeroo, who's a amazing pioneering dancer here in New York, who's really great at whacking. And she's just taken it to this next step with her dance company. It's really elevated to Broadway production musical level. It is amazing to see these dancers get to perform in these amazing spaces like the Lincoln Center and stuff. So anyway, I'm bringing them into the studio. We're going to be collecting some kind of data from the dancers and then applying that to existing 3D models. And the project, the theme of the project is about queer community finding home in the kind of subculture in the dance scene, in the rave scene, in the club scene. And it's maybe a tribute to my, younger self, my early days in the 90s rave culture. And when I was kind of, discovering myself as a queer person and a kind of young queer person, a bit lost. As a teenager and, kind of found this rave scene and the community in there. And then, I worked with a lot of in gay clubs after as a bartender. And then I worked with a lot of queer organizations doing things like drag shows and burlesque for fundraising. So I just love queer culture. And, it comes up in my practice quite a bit. A lot of my work nods to, queer icons and queer dance styles and kind of queer forms of aesthetics and camp aesthetics. That sort of thing comes up a lot in my practice. So I think, a lot of it's inspired by this kind of, my younger self. Yeah.
Do you have any special rave memories that are directly inspired in your work?
Yeah. So there's one scene that the first scene for the VR project it's in a forest, and it's a part of this. It was this one of the first raves I went to, and it was outside of Ottawa. And what they used to do back in the day when it was underground, you didn't know where the rave was until an hour. But actually, you were never told. You were just told the meeting spot. And it was always at the corner of Columbus and Rideau Street. And all the little ravers in their colorful clothes and would meet up there. And a shuttle bus would pick us up and just drive us into like a field or an abandoned warehouse. Like, I don't know how the organizers found these places, but it was always like an hour or so outside of town. And then you just kind of show up there and, you'd party it through into the night. And then, I don't know, at 7 a.m, they'd pick you up and take you back to the same spot. But anyway, that's how we did it in Ottawa back in the day. And it's kind of based on that experience of being in this kind of liminal space and not knowing where you're going, where you're going to end up, and kind of finding community for this night. On the dance floor, and obviously with some recreational activities as well. So that comes up in the project. There's a bit of like, with the VR, I'm trying to create like hallucinations, but in a kind of more artistic way. So the characters they're going to glitch and melt, and there's going to be aspects that are reminiscent of like, those kind of recreational activities, but not necessarily. It won't be so literal. Yeah. But the project name already kind of suggests it. It's called Candy Flip, which is a combination of, I don't know, some people know what it is. And the people who do, I was like, oh, okay. But it's a combination of two substances anyway. So, and it's called the Candy Flip. But yeah, so it does come up in the work, and it was based on this experience I had when I was maybe 15, 16 years old.
How does like the energy and ethos of the rave scene translate into your art? And it can be expanding beyond this current project that you're working in. Do you find yourself repeatedly drawn to the rave culture in your art? For me, the rave and queer culture are very similar in my journey and how I discovered myself. So I find they overlap and they're connected for me. But I would say, one of the mantras of the rave culture was like peace, love, unity, and respect. It was plur. And I think that's something that I've carried forward with me. I think that's what my practice tries to promote is basically that. It's about kind of generating a conversation. It's about connecting people, unifying people. I'm not always the most respectful. My work tends to be a bit irreverent sometimes, but in like a humorous, campy way, always with good intention, never to actually offend anyone. But yeah, I think, and to create a more like loving and collective kind of community. I think that's, to create a dialogue and community around the work has always been my main goal. And how do you navigate the challenges of representing these themes in your art?
Each project is different. Some artists have like one particular theme that, they'll dig deep. Like, for example, a painter wants to paint cats and they'll paint cats for 30 years. I'm not that artist. Each project is different. Each project has its own considerations, whether they're ethical considerations, technical considerations. I like to tell stories that inspire me in the kind of moment, or that I feel inspired by like the world around me. I'm really inspired by politics because of my upbringing. And my background and my education and like women's studies and gender and race studies, decolonialism, this really like impacts my work. And with that comes a certain, responsibility when you're dealing with marginalized communities and kind of telling stories of others, especially. Those are certain challenges that come up in the work. And each one is specific. And I can't say I've always done everything, in the most ethical way. I do things with the kind of vocabulary, tools, and resources I have in the moment. And I try and, always remember that, this is in the service of the community. And if it's not going to be in service of the community, to maybe reconsider or, make different aesthetic choices if I can to have it in a way that, doesn't romanticize a specific situation. For example, with the Blue Girl Project, I think that one is what comes to mind because that was supposed to be a documentary. And it was about, in its current, state, it's a 3-channel operatic video installation. It's kind of this like feminist sci-fi piece, but it was supposed to be a documentary with women in Central Asia who had self-immolated. And self-immolation is the process of like setting oneself ablaze. And a lot of these women do this as response to like domestic violence at home. Mostly it's like a, resistance. It's a form of resistance to that. And it's an embodied like political protest. So, we were supposed to go with a cousin of mine to do this project because it was part of her research. And she went there and she met the survivors and they were like, we're not really interested in a documentary. Mm-hmm. And we had funding. Mm-hmm. With hopes that, there was at some points people had agreed, but then, after we got the funding, they were like, no, this isn't exactly what we had signed up for, but we would be willing to contribute to this project. So I was like, okay, how else can we tell the story? Right. So I was like, can I use your testimonials and still protect their anonymity? And they were like, absolutely. Like, and I was like, can we turn it into like a song and like amplify their voices and pay tribute, but still offer up, something that's kind of literal, tells the story without singling out like specific people's, or survivors. And they were fine with that. So I worked with an Iranian composer. We made a song and I made this like I said, like a kind of feminist futuristic tableau. And the image it was beautiful, but it was so stylized and so romantic. And I think I still haven't, I'm still grappling with that and figuring, was this the best way to tell the story? I think for me, documentary felt like the only way that would have been acceptable to tell the story, especially in like a collaborative space. But though it is stylized and romantic, it still does amplify the voices of these women. It still sheds light on this experience. And it's something that, a lot of people don't know about. They don't know how often it's occurring in that region. There was some research saying like up to 4 women a day are self-immolating in the region. So, it is a common occurrence that's very regional too. So yeah, it's not something we're hearing about so much in the West. So, it did do that. And I think one of the kind of moments of this piece that I thought was really, really topical, was during the Nuit Blanche, when actually the curator who's funding the VR project, Julie, supported this project for Nuit Blanche Toronto in 2000. It was on 2019, but as an installation, I think it was 2022, if I'm correct. And anyway, she put on this beautiful tableau, and it was such a large and epic installation in Mellesman Square in North York. And it was on the same day that all around the world, there was 150 countries protesting for the Iranian women's liberation movement, the Women Life Freedom movement. So all of these, and Mellesman Square is in kind of the heart of the Iranian community in North York, uptown in Toronto. So you had all these women with all these people with Iranian flags and Mahsa Amini posters and, Women Life Freedom posters. And they were all there. And there was this huge tableau that you could hear. I mean, it was so loud. You could hear it coming from the TTC. And it was just like the voices of these women talking about, oppression in Persian too. So it was just I think it was so spectacular, and it just reached. And we didn't plan for any of this. It was just a coincidence. But anyway, it was probably the most site-specific installation I ever did. And I kind of forgave myself for aestheticizing it at that moment, because I realized at that moment the community probably needed something like a sense of catharsis.
So you've spoken about your Iranian heritage. How does that blend into your art?
Well, with the Blue Girl, the opera is... in Farsi. operatic piece. It was done with a Persian composer, Persian cellist, Persian two sopranos. So, that was really nice, like kind of tribute from the women in the diaspora to the women in the kind of native and ancestral land. But I think a lot of my work does reflect on my experiences growing up in diaspora. I think diaspora is at the heart of my work because there's, again, like when we're talking about ethics and we're talking about representation, there are certain responsibilities that we in the diaspora, artists in the diaspora, have to the native community to make sure that the work we're creating isn't, exoticizing or dehumanizing or perpetuating like a singular, problematic narrative of what's going on back home. And because my parents fled after the Iran-Iraq war, I was only 3. So I never got to actually grow up in Iran, and I grew up in Canada, and my experience is of that of the diaspora. It is hybrid. I have both cultural influences, and I have a certain responsibility to the native community when I talk about like my Persianness. Mm-hmm. So, and I feel that way. And as an artist, I've made mistakes before. For example, making work, critiquing the hijab when what do I know about the hijab? I've never actually worn it, so I've never had to wear it. So it was one of those, you grow as an artist, and I think your ethics and your questions become more complicated and nuanced the more you go deeper into these ideas and your projects. So yeah, I really decided, I think at a certain point that, my story and my voice isn't the one of hybrid. And there's room for that. So I created a lot of characters that kind of explore my hybrid identity and my diasporic identity. And through these characters, I explore all the many, complexities of being diasporic and feeling both that responsibility, but, rejection from the native community and your host nation, feeling like betwixt or liminal in between, in relation to the ancestral land and the host nation. And, these are the type of the things that I explore through the character. So these are some of the questions and ideas that I explore through the character work.
How do you think your art contributes to conversations about Iranian diaspora experiences?
Mm-hmm. I think my work is very intersectional. Of course, then you have like a queer Iranian diasporic experience, and then you have a very gendered queer, diaspora, and then you have a very classed one too. So, I think it does contribute to the conversation in a really meaningful way. But you really have to spend time with the work to understand all the footnotes. Because at the heart of my kind of strategy or my methodology or whatever is like accessibility. I want to make those work. I use a lot of humor. I use a lot of play, costumes, theatricality, like I said, camp aesthetics. So I think most people, when they see the work, if they're not following along so closely to the script of the piece, they understand right away that it is a critique. It's a critique of race. I think that's the first thing that comes up for them, and it's one of the things that most people often ask me, "Oh, was this about identity politics? Is this about race relations?" And I'm like, "Yes, it is." But then they hear the artist talk, and then they see kind of my maybe conceptual analysis of how I'm like creating these characters and for what reason, and like parts of the script, like what does that actually mean when this character says that she's Aryan, and like what does that mean in relation to the Iranian nationalist community, and what does that mean in relation to like the Iranian diaspora community. And so I try, again, like unless you're reading exactly what I'm reading and doing the research I'm doing, you're never going to pick up on all those footnotes. But that's why the artist talk is so important. I think it's such a key part of my practice is to always have this forum where people can ask these questions, and we can have like more difficult and more complicated conversations about, the subtleties in the work and this kind of subtext of all these things.
Can you talk about a piece where you felt that your cultural identity strongly influenced the outcome?
I mean, I think maybe talking about the characters a bit and how I developed them and where they come from might like be a better way to like answer that question or reflect on that question. So Oreo, for example, I created in response to, having grown up in diaspora in a predominantly white Franco community and having internalized white supremacy and my process of overcoming that. And like learning to like love and embrace my brownness. So this character has like internalized, her own sense of inferiority. And I kind of explore the complexity of that through makeup applications and all that. But then in 2014, I had this experience with this Iranian gallerist who identified as like white and Aryan. And she rejected my identifying as a person of color. And she was really appalled that I was identifying as such. And this kind of opened up the character and my interest in what it means to be white and Aryan in the diaspora from like an Iranian position. Because for me, post 9/11, being Iranian feels very much racialized. And having grown up in a Franco community also felt very racialized, a Franco-Catholic community, right? So I don't know about her specific experiences in New York, where this gallerist was based at the time, but it seemed like she definitely had a certain class privilege. So maybe, that was something that she felt like she passed as white because she was of a certain class. I mean, that could be her experiences, and I don't want to speak to her experiences. But it's something that, I started to use this character to explore like that Aryan race myth and its history and Iranian nationalist discourse. And then Fatima, or Goldolf, is my other character, also kind of emerged from this self-exploration of what it means to be Iranian in the West and like the kind of Western gaze, that Occidental gaze, the Orientalist gaze, and, the expectation of ethnic artists to perform like their kind of like, again, a singular narrative or like a romantic or an exotic version of themselves to be readable to a Western audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what that character explores. And again, that's based on my experiences as like an Iranian person in the diaspora who doesn't want to exotify my community. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, and then feeling that pressure that, that's the only way that our world will accept it, is that if it's readable in a kind of the stereotypical way in which they've been conditioned to understand, or, I don't even want to say educate, but, the stereotypical kind of misrepresentations that they know, and that's what they want to see performed, right? And it's all about like relationships of power. And then, Coco is this kind of liminal, I would say like probably the closest to a portrait of myself, my experiences, kind of queer, hybrid subject who, communicates through dance and movement and like doesn't want to participate in colonial language and is like, non-binary, and also is always represented in like glitch or light, or is like and reads manifestos or like disrupts, one of my works in Celestial Throne, which is like a game show parody of Jeopardy. Coco like disrupts the game show with this like manifesto, right? And I really love like the ways that character has opened up a kind of poetics in my work that I feel like with the other two characters I haven't had the opportunity to explore, because they feel somewhat more, I don't know, like about educating the public. And being a bit more didactic. With Coco, I get to explore poetics and like movement and glitch and light installations and all this stuff. So the way I'm like imagining this character in relation to the other two is really, I don't know, liberating, I feel like, especially also as an ethnic artist, we're always expected to make political work. Mm-hmm. And I am a person who does make political work. I mean, but I also love poetics, and I feel like it's not something that I ever felt like I had the privilege to just go for it and do. So yeah, through the character, it still is political. Like Glitch is political and being hybrid is political, but I'm finding different ways, like different tools to communicate that. And it's been really nice.
I would like to shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
Because you mentioned something very interesting, which was that you were interested to become a diplomat.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
So my name is Rah Eleh, which is a Persian name for someone who's always on the go. It also means traveler. And my mom gave me that name because she wanted me to be a diplomat and she wanted me to be a person who traveled well. And I feel like, and because I grew up in politics, my parents were both activists. And serious activists, organizing every week, meeting the political organization. Like we were part of an organization. And for much of my youth, up until about the time I was 15, until my parents kind of retired from activism. And so it really did, I thought I would be a politician. I thought I would be a diplomat. I remember in high school, I was nominated as most likely to be the next female prime minister. So, I think I always had a political side, and I was a part of a lot of nonprofit organizations, educational organizations, activist organizations, mostly for feminist and queer organizations during my early years in university. And then I was doing a political science degree, and I don't know, I think I was about first or second year in the program. And I remember feeling I remember how burnt out my parents were from activism. And they were so defeated because, we fought with that organization, like I said, for years. And prior to me being born, my parents were also part of that organization for about 20 years. And I think I just saw how much they were defeated. We never brought about any change. Nothing shifted in the Iranian regime. It all stayed the same. And they were like a socialist, movement. And there was some corruption after, in the organization. And that's why my parents left. But I just thought, I wanted a creative outlet, like a creative space to be political. This was at a time where I was a bit younger, I was optimistic that my art could do that art could do that, that art could change policy. What's the word I'm looking for? I thought it could have more impact, that it could influence things more significantly. And then, I realized after being in the art world now, how inaccessible this space is to an actual public. A lot of these spaces, whether, it's the $40 museum entry, but also, you're not getting politicians going into these spaces all the time and thinking so deeply about, how this abstract painting could influence, their policies. And so there is, I think photojournalism does a really good job, and documentary does a really good job at shedding light and making people mobilize very quickly. I mean, I think about, for example, that young child, Alan Kurdi, who was washed up ashore. I think it was in Greece. He was a refugee during the crisis. I remember how quickly people responded to that image. And then all of a sudden policies were, people wanted to protect the refugees. And they were like, what's happening? We see a dying child on the shore, a real image, that really triggers something. But then you look at Ai Weiwei's stylization of that, you know what I mean? And you're like, right? And that doesn't have the same sense of urgency. And in fact, it's quite problematic. I mean, he was critiqued for that project. So, I think there are kind of limits with what art can do, but other people will contest that. And I think that's a bigger, more existential question. But all that to say, I did want to be a diplomat, and I still wonder, I feel like I'm a cultural diplomat, especially by the work I do for, I run a women's network. It's part of an international network for women. It's called Saloon. I founded and run the Toronto division. And I work with the international board and, I do intersectional training. So I feel like I am a part of some sort of like cultural diplomacy. And I do a ton of residencies and, I'm doing a PhD in Vienna. So I feel like my practice being so international, I do generate conversations and maybe I make more of an impact than I think I do, Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it just feels like even when we are writing our MPs and we are doing the actual, activist, like the real political work of making those phone calls, donating, and so, trying to, use social media as a tool to bring awareness to all the atrocities that have been happening in the world around us. I feel like, at the end of the day, as many protests as we go to, and it just feels like they're not listening, So I don't know. I definitely feel defeated.
What was it like shifting gears? And I'm curious to even know how that happened.
Yeah. I applied to the art program at Ottawa U. I was doing the political science program at Ottawa U, and I applied with a really poor portfolio. It wasn't nice at all. But I had a really good letter. An intention letter, and it just kept following up. I was really adamant. I kept following up with the man. It's like, am I in yet? Am I in yet? And finally, they accepted me in the program. And the first year or two, actually the whole time during the program, I made very 1970s feminist political. It was a lot of blood.
I love it.
A lot of vaginas, it was a lot of nudity. It was very inspired by early, and I remember a lot of my professors were like, okay, she's political, she's radical, she's feminist, she's definitely more performance. And many of them supported me and, my curiosity and the boldness. But I think others, they were like, you need to find another strategy because it's angry, it's aggressive, and I didn't, at the time I thought, well, I don't have a responsibility to the viewer, but then I realized I do. I have somewhat of a responsibility to the viewer, and I need to also figure out a different strategy to communicate. So that's when I started to think about, well, how can I cross those ethical boundaries a little bit? How can I make people uncomfortable but still keep them engaged? And that's when humor and comedy became my tool of choice, right? Because with comedy, you can just say most things, mm-hmm. And you can cross certain boundaries, but it's humor and it's self-reflexive. It kind of turns the gaze back upon itself to make a critique. And that was an important strategy for me. And it's something that I thought was really, really effective in the ways that I wanted to kind of shake things up but still engage people. I think when I realized in the first and second year of my university studies, I was pretty, I don't know, I'm not going to say turned off, but I didn't find a lot of the Euro and Western art was connecting to me. It didn't resonate with me profoundly in any way. I didn't feel super inspired by it. And then I went to Europe and I saw some of these paintings and, learned about art history through travel. And that became more interesting for me. But then in my third and fourth year of university, I had a professor who taught Iranian art and martyrdom and politics. And then I had a gender and race class. So that's when I started to feel like, okay, there is a space for, political art. There's an appreciation for political art and there's a history of it. And that's when I felt like, okay, there is a space for me in this as well. So, maybe, and that's when I think around third or fourth year, I really decided to commit to the practice. I'm doing a PhD right now. It's all about, most of my focus is on counter and ethnic futurism. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, I actually start by looking at Italian futurism. I'm actually going to the Getty Museum next month to do some research with the Italian and Russian Futurist Archive.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. I know that's and it's going to be sunny, so that's exciting. So yeah, I'm starting to look at the archives. I was really interested in artistic manifestos and like especially nationalist manifestos, because you still see these nationalist manifestos emerge every time one of these kids, like these little white supremacist far right children, go up and shoot a mosque or whatever. For some reason, they're drawn to the manifesto as a format, as a writing, and the Italian futurists were a kind of very far right, fascist, ultra conservative movement. I mean, they did have a great, the Seratas and to arouse politics, and they had great visions of the future. And by great, I mean grandiose, not great like something that we should praise.
Good, yeah.
And they were also very anti-feminist as well, right? Though there were women in the Italian movement. Yeah. So I'm going to the archive to see if there is any writings from these women or any artworks that I could source and look at. So so in the Western kind of canon or art history, it starts with a kind of Italian futurism, but counter and ethnic futurism, I would say more or less emerged with Sun Ra, who was a jazz musician. His band Orchestra, they were like a experimental jazz band, and he's credited as like the godfather of Afrofuturism. And then many years later, in the 90s, we start to see things like indigenous futurisms or like kind of cyber feminist proposal for Gulf Arab futurism in about 2007. And then Lawrence Leck wrote and did this video essay on Sino-futurism, looking at China and the diaspora. I can't remember exactly what year that was. But anyway, so it is more contemporary in terms of the discourse and the scholarship. But if you think about sci-fi as a genre, maybe without like Jules Verne, really you could think of like any oral tradition. You could think of like the Iranian book of like the Shahnameh, like the Book of Kings, or Greek mythology, or even the Arabian Nights stories as like early science fiction. You know what I mean? So even though we didn't really like label it as like an ethnic futurism at the time, it has been around, cave drawings like that tell stories of cosmology and stuff like that. So, I think in the canon, it starts later than it's actually been like, we gave it a name at a certain point, but it's been around forever. So, my work is looking at these futurisms, the possibilities, the limits of these proposals. What does it offer us, and what are the pitfalls? It does tend to be a very kind of Anglo and Euro-Western centric project proposals, because they did emerge out of a lot of the diasporas and stuff like that. So, we maybe need to include more people from the peripheries into this kind of production of knowledge, and also maybe open up the archives and the collections to celebrate artists, from other parts of the world who are working with sci-fi futuristic aesthetics as well.
Is ethnic futurism something like a concept that you're going to bring to life in your work in the future?
I think Supernova was my entry into that. It's already, I would say my work is already pretty much in that world and in that genre. I have a lot of sci-fi elements. So I call my work a kind of xenofuturism. So it has a bit of like, an alien futurism, and xeno also for me embodies, my queer subjectivity, my like kind of a post-colonial feminist subjectivity, a diasporic and kind of betwixt liminal subjectivity. So I like the term xenofuturism a lot. I wrote a manifesto called Xenofuturism, and to this day I say that I had never heard this word up until a few years ago, but I wrote this text that puts forward like certain prompts about thinking about. It's kind of like a call to action. That I created that writing in about 2018, 2019. And a lot of those prompts have informed character development, with Coco especially. They even informed a couple of dinners. So we had like these kind of futuristic inspired meals that were inspired by each of the prompts. One was done at Soft Surf Plus with my friend Joel Cunin, who curated the show, but he also designed a 5-course tasting menu in response to each of the prompts. And kind of, and with his blessing, I took the project to Norway, and we did it this year at the museum in Oslo. And it was a 5-course tasting menu that I created with things that were food and scraps that were going to be discarded by the museum kitchen. That still had a couple days left, and then rocks and organic material that I found by the shoreline in Norway, and we used that for plating, and it was a really intimate space. And most of the people that were invited to this dinner were from the queer and in Oslo, so it was really nice. And with each tapa or whatever, I read the manifesto to them, and then we had a conversation about the prompts, and and they were really inspired by the prompts, and it created a really beautiful exchange and just an encounter. And it was really cool. So it's really nice how these ideas manifest and inspired me to adapt them to different types of things too.
So you received a SOBI nomination.
I did, yeah.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
How do you feel your art has been received since the nomination? Has it changed in any way?
Well, I have to, give a big shout out to Ursula and Angela for nominating me. Their letter was just so, I don't know, I felt like it was like a love letter from artists to artists. It's just a peer recognition.
Brilliant.
And because Ursula had won the Sobies too a few years back, it was just such an honor to get a letter from her, because I've been such a fan of Ursula's work for so many years. So, and I really appreciated it. I mean, the nomination itself was really nice. I mean, it was, I had been nominated before, and I had never received the long list. So it was especially touching for me that it came from Ursula, and that it was, they recognize that kind of that action of solidarity, between the two of us. So I really appreciate that. In terms of my practice, I'm not sure it generated any more experiences or anything new. I mean, it's great to be on the long list and for people to see your name, and you never know how it might influence something in the future. No one's come up to me in the last year and said, "Oh, I saw your name on the SOBI. I want to give you a show," or anything. But who knows? Maybe in 4 years, someone might come up to me and say, "I saw your name in the SOBI 4 years ago, and I was really interested in your work." So you just never know, how these awards and things are going to influence your practice.
Being in New York, does it, and I guess maybe not even just so much being in New York, but when you're traveling internationally and having that different lens, do you perceive the Canadian art scene differently?
Being in New York right now, going to Chelsea, for example, I'm like, my God, the art market is so conservative, There are, I love flower paintings, but there are a lot of flower paintings. They're beautiful. I mean, I get it. They sell. But it's always a bit surprising to me, the market, especially, and the lack of digital art I see in there, especially with how, post NFTs and there aren't a lot of collectors who are collecting digital art as much as you think. And it's working with commercial spaces, the few galleries and relationships I've had, they're very transparent from the get-go. They're like, I can't sell video. You know what I mean? That's not something that sells. What else can you make? We're interested, but what else can you make? So I have been thinking about my, the kind of commercial aspect of my work and where that could go. But Yeah, I'd say in certain places, the artists run places or maybe the nonprofit places. That's where, there's more space for political work. There's more space for video. I love Berlin's art scene. I mean, I haven't done a lot of travels in the Arab world or Asia or the Latin America. Like there are gaps in my places of, so I have mostly traveled across Europe and across the States. And I feel like I really love the aesthetics in Berlin. The work there, it is political and it is about nationalism and because of their history as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I guess I see work in those spaces that I think resonates with my own practice and aesthetic a bit more. But yeah, I mean, there are pockets. Like I went to the Guggenheim here and they had the best show I think I've seen in New York so far. It was called After Dark and there was a ton of digital artwork and all of like the art stars at the moment who are being really celebrated for digital art. So it was an exciting show to see. And it was right in the rotunda, and it took up the entire 5-6 floors of the rotunda. So it was great to see, these artists being showcased in such an iconic space. So yeah, I mean, I think in the museum space it's very different and the artist run space. I mean, I love Canada's artist run center because a culture. One, it's not something you actually see in a lot of countries. Artist run centers, especially funded ones by the government with unions, with art council support and that sort of thing. So it's really great to, I love Canada's artist run culture. And I think it's what's made my career and it's what's allowed me to make these kind of ambitious, big installs with the support of these types of curators and practitioners who are interested in community dialogue and exchange and centering political art. So I think Canada's art scene is fabulous and super rich and dynamic too.
So what's next for you?
Well, I have that research trip coming up in the Getty. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm also part of a group show in Switzerland right now.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's called What Power Does to Us. And it's in a town called, Pfeifen. It's right outside of Zurich. And it's at the Vogelkulturzentrum. And it's curated by Dr. Alexander Kultz. And the project is, it's a really great space. It's in this museum and the installation that they've put on is just stunning. It's so incredible, but I'm so excited because I'm in a group show with Marina Abramovic and Ule. So that's that's really cool and inspiring to have my work in kind of dialogue with someone like Marina Abramovic in an exhibition, even though I don't get to meet her or anything.
Oh,
that would have been really fantastic. But I mean, there are also a lot of other amazing artists and works in the show as well. But I put on my Celestial Throne. It's like a 2-channel, like I said, the Jeopardy project. So they did it as a different iteration, the exact same iteration basically as it was in Venice at the ECC, the European Cultural Center Pavilion. So they actually saw the work there and they were like, can we bring this to Switzerland? So that was really nice.
Rah, where can everyone find your work?
Yeah. So you can find it on my website at, Rah Eleh, that's RAH-ELEH.com. I'm on Instagram at ELEHRAH. That's my handle, Ella Rah. My name's kind of in reverse there. For distribution, you can go through V-Tape and you can rent my videos or screen them and get a streaming license or an acquisition license that way. And if people are interested, I recently am working with Studio 66 in Ottawa for any commercials or sales or commercial commissions as well.
Well, Rah, thank you so much.
Thank you,
It
Katie.
was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate the support and the opportunity to talk with you. And thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and this super engaging conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on ArtBeat, where the stories of Canadian art come to life. Follow us on Instagram at ArtBeat Podcast for exclusive content and previews of what's to come. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay updated with our journey through the world of Canadian art. Enjoyed the episode? Leave a review or recommend us to a fellow art enthusiast. Together, let's keep the conversation going and deepen our connection to the diverse world of Canadian art. See you next time.